Welcome, everyone. This is Avi with Chuck Whelon for Oakland Creates Art Makers series. I'm super excited to have Chuck on the show. I was on his YouTube interview, his live show was it a year or two ago?
It was a while back, yes.
So that was super exciting, and I appreciate you. I'm going to share my screen and have you sort of tell the folks who you are. Let's see. Can we see? All right. Perfect. So just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, well, there I am. Okay, well, I'm a cartoonist and illustrator. I'm also an author and a game designer. I have my own publishing imprint, which is Planet Earth Entertainment, and I've self-published a lot of books over the years. So really, sort of starting with my webcomic Pufol, which I used to do that. I mean, I started it in the early 1990s as a sort of black and white zine, and I would sort of do that off and on. As a project. And then I guess when the internet came around, really as soon as the internet came around, I would start putting that on the internet.
Mhm.
And I got regular with it. I would say, round about 2000, I started doing it as a regular daily strip. And it got on this site called moderntales.com that was like, it was a pioneering professional webcomics portal. It described itself, run by this guy, Joey Manley, who well, he's sadly since passed away quite a while ago now. But
That was
you know,
really
he
early in the life of the internet, though. 2000. That was pretty early.
yes, I was definitely kind of on the internet from the get-go and thinking, oh yeah, this is a good place to sort of put my comics and do that. I mean, because yeah, I'd done them at zines, and it was quite hard to get zines out there. I mean, well, you had to do it like, physically in person. There was a guy in Britain who ran a sort of magazine called Zoom, and he would sort of write reviews of the zine. So you sort of had to send your zine to him, and
Wow.
he'd write you a review, and then people people could order it from that, or do whatever shows. But I guess in 1995, I moved to the US through a job opportunity that I had, which was I don't know. I wasn't really sort of thinking, oh, I've got to move to the US, but I had this opportunity to come here, and it was sort of just part time. But I decided I quite liked it. I mean, it was sort of temporary, but then I, managed to stay here, and so I think I'd done my first issue zine of Pupil when I moved here, and then I continued to do like zines here for a few years, and then until I sort of started making it more officially as a web comic. And then now I collected that, and then at some point I collected those into books, which I do self-publish through Ingram Spark. And then I've sort of over the years collected up quite a little library of different books of things that I've done. And more recently, I've been doing this thing called Earth Space, which is sort of science fiction cartoons,
Yeah,
more like a single panel.
and I was gonna say that's what you mostly post on Instagram that I've noticed.
Yes. I think Instagram has been my main focus. I've tried sort of Facebook, and again, I was sort of on a lot of these things really right from the get-go, but Instagram's done quite well for me as far as just sort of showing images. Facebook, I've never really gotten much response off Facebook, to be honest, even though probably I know more people in my personal life on Facebook.
Right, same.
Yeah, and then TikTok's been doing quite well for me because of live drawing. So I sort of I was doing the simplified Earth Space cartoons, which was part of a process of really simplifying my work. And then I got into doing live drawings.
Right.
So you're sort of showing a bit of both there, yes. So, the live drawings came about at I started going to some live drawing. So I got in this process of really simplifying my style down as simple as possible. Like, oh, how would I do a really sort of simple character? And, so Earthspace was really about super simple, like, how can I tell a little funny sci-fi story?
Can you
And then
tell
I was
me?
sort of doing, oh yeah, sorry, yeah.
I was gonna say, can you talk about like the theme of Earth Space, like, what who the characters are and what the sort of plot or the general idea around it is?
Yes, so I sort of had an idea right at the beginning, but I didn't define it too much when I started. I sort of when I first was going, I sort of started defining it, and I thought, oh no, I'm going to keep it really loose. But the idea was there was a sort of space cadet on a space station, sort of thing, and I was just doing some simple little space facts, and then just like little sort of ideas that would pop into my head, and then I thought, well, how can I sort of translate it into a sort of science fiction idea? Because yeah, Pewful would always be sort of fantasy, although undercurrent of science fiction in there too. But I guess science fiction is sort of kind of my primary love. And so I was doing that. And yeah, so this character, the Space Cadet, who's now Space Jen, I've defined her. She's like a sort of clone. And then Astro Kitty. So I was doing these sort of kind of cat characters were popping up.
Nice.
And then, so Astro Kitty sort of emerged as I was doing the live drawings. And, I was sort of drawing models. And I went to a thing called Dr. Sketchy, where some of the local cartoonists were going. And this was in around 2019. Drawing clothes models at the DNA Lounge, which was very sort of fun and exciting thing to
Yeah,
do.
I think Eugene goes to those too.
Yes, yeah, I thought well, it got shut down with the pandemic. I think it sort of re-exists again now. Yeah, I'm not sure. I know. I remember Jeff Plotkin would go there, and that's where I met Greg McCrary for the first time. Became quite friendly with him, and yeah, no, a lot of good artists were there doing that. And at the end of the session, the model would pick their favorite drawings, and mine got picked a few times. I was like, oh, I guess from drawing all these cartoons all the years, I've sort of learned a little bit about drawing models, and I used to like to do that a bit in my early days, but then I saw, oh, I'm not very good, and I didn't really pursue it that much. But then I was sort of getting some positive feedback on it, and so I started pursuing it a lot. And then pandemic came along and shut that down, and I decided to just sort of keep it going. But I got very into the sort of quick drawing and live drawing and not doing any pencil or under drawing. And then Zoom and all that came along, and I got more into the idea of filming it and making little videos and doing that. So I was sort of doing that, and then sort of came up with Astro Kitty as a sort of way to, okay, so doing a sort of drawing like that, but then kind of make it my own a bit more, make my own character. So there, and then the other thing that came about with that was because I was filming them and putting them on Instagram places with music, and I had some friends that did music. My one friend Chris had actually done a track for me at one point, and so I got an idea to sort of put together a little album of music, from my friends' bands and stuff, which I somehow thought, oh, people are more interested in music than cartoons. But I learned that they're not really. It's about the same. So, but I sort of had sort of beginner's luck, I think, of just sort of going around and asking people, "Oh, can I have your track on my album?" And they were happy to do it. And I went about it the same way I would have gone about like doing a comics anthology. I'm not ever put one together, but I've participated in a few. And it's quite easy to ask people, oh, do you want to be part of my anthology? And, generally they say yes. And generally they've got something, that they can put on there. And, I didn't ask for any sort of exclusive license or anything. But yeah, I sort of got, so then I could put my drawings to their music. And then,
No, that's crucial because I did the same. Like I asked Lawrence Lindell, who does music, who's also a comic, graphic novelist, cartoonist, zine maker, and he has an amazing array of music. He has a couple albums out, and then also I don't know if you listen to the music on my YouTube channel, like the Rap Duh, which DA the Rap Nerd. Like I've used so many of his albums, and they're like you said, as long as you don't ask for copyrights, I
yeah.
mean, they're super, excited about letting you use their music.
Yeah, and I think that's the very sort of fun, and it's a different discipline. I mean, I know one or two people who've been sort of successful at being cartoonists and musicians, but mostly they're sort of separate disciplines. And it's fun. They're excited to see their music with the cartoons, and I'm excited to have like original music, and I felt a bit like kid in the candy store having my pick of the songs I thought I liked the best that I thought went together and sort of fit with my sort of spacey theme. So yes,
No,
it's an alternative future. You asked me
it's
about that
so
as well.
much.
Yes,
No,
yes, it's what the future may hold for us.
it
And
is so
yeah.
much. It's so much fun to pick music, original music from these artists to have, go with your drawings because, like you said, it goes hand in hand and it's kind of like the same in terms of underground music or like indie music. So, but it's so exciting to be able to, like you said, a kid in a candy store, like, oh my God, like I can pick this track and that track and
Yeah.
which one feels better on the drawing.
And I love those tracks more, than I might like some commercial song that's come out, because okay, that's more meaningful to me. And yeah, so and that's been, again, music. Well, I had a music teacher who designated me a non-singer quite early on, and I never had a lot of, I've never been like big into music, but I've sort of gotten a lot more sort of interested in it as I've got older, and it's just been really fun to sort of do that. And people who've been like, again, in music, if you want to be successful, you've kind of got to be successful in your early 20s, or it's quite hard to break into that world.
Or even
Um,
being willing. I feel like a lot of times you have to be willing to not necessarily do your own style at first or your own music, and kind of go with what is more popular and universal. like that everybody would like. And I think that's the great part of indie music is it can be weird and quirky and
Yeah, and actually I think that's true with comics too, and that like so many people, copy somebody's style or even just be doing sort of superhero characters or whatever, well-known characters. And I don't know, I've done a little bit, but not that much. I don't know. I mean, I sort of had it a bit like drummed into me when I was young not to copy things. And,
yeah.
although copying is a good way to learn stuff. So I don't really want to promote that necessarily, but I don't know. I've just always been more into like doing my own original characters. And I mean, the reason I draw is I've got all these things in my head that, I'm very compelled to get them out. And if I don't really want to waste time drawing things that other people have done. I mean, it sort of depends where you're coming from. I mean, that's because I'm a little more on the right. I'm not super a writer, but I've got the sort of general ideas of things.
Yeah.
That if you're purely about style, then maybe it's like, okay, yeah, I want to do these characters in my style. But yeah, I just like to my own independent thing, I guess, a lot.
No, 100%. Like I've never been big on the traditional superhero. I grew up, and I tell this to people all the time, and maybe it's a generational thing. Like I grew up with Golden Legacy, Black History, historical comics. And so right from the
Oh,
beginning, the comics that I got were like historical, like true life stories of all these Black inventors or Black historical characters. So I didn't
oh.
immediately jump into like X-Men or to Spider-Man or Superman. I got into those a little later, and then even as a teen, I was more interested in YA literature and not necessarily graphic novels, but into um like the teen horror, like VC Andrews type things.
Oh yeah, VC Andrews. Yes, I didn't read those. My sister liked those though. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it was a little bit different. Same kind of general theme, but a little different.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. I mean, I like to growing up comics wise. I mean, I read different. I mean, I would read Mickey Mouse comic stuff quite young, which I guess would be Carl Barks and that Donald Ducks I liked, and then I sort of like sort of British comics. Things like I like Buster comic, which was uh sort of less. He was sort of Buster was the son of Andy Capp. I don't know. It was probably yeah, I don't know. But then that was only a short phase, and then I got into Judge Dredd in 2000 AD, and
mm,
how sort of weird those were, very sort of anarchic and subversive, and I had. My only, we up to about age 10, you could still get Marvel, like they would be the same issues, the same comics would be sold in the UK, but then they started doing Marvel UK. I think that
oh,
actually probably started with Star Wars comics, and they
wow.
produced them in UK format, which was more magazine size weekly rather than the smaller comic book size. So, but then I never really liked those as much. But I read a lot, I remember reading a lot of them one year in France. We went on a holiday in France, and they had all these French copies of Spider-Man and
Wow.
Iron Man and Planet of the Apes comics, which I really love Planet of the Apes.
I never
But
saw
they would be big, fat sort of digest books, like unlike anything that
right.
I've seen here or there. But I really got through those, which I sort of just about could understand. I don't know. I guess I.
Interesting that it just never dawned on me that there would be a whole different imprint in Europe then, which makes sense, but I never even thought that in my head, like, oh, they have a different imprint of comic books, same company, but different, presented differently.
Yes, yes, presented differently. I mean, it was a shame because I always enjoyed the early ones. They were very mysterious because they would like have things like the sea monkeys, and you had to have a zip code in order to order them, and so that made them even more mysterious because you couldn't like what's the zip code? You couldn't order them. It said you had to be in the USA, and be like, oh,
Oh,
okay.
wow, that's crazy. No, because I used to get into my brothers were into Mad magazine, the like really irreverent comics. I can't remember who the person who drew those cartoons.
Oh, yeah, we would get mad too, but they again they would sort of UKize it a bit, and they would some things would get swapped out. So the broader things would stay the same, like the sort of movie parodies. But then certain segments, I think they would replace them with sort of British stuff.
Hmm. So let's talk a little bit about your different styles because I noticed the contrast right away in these two different comics. So it's the one Herb Space with the general in the red. Is that part digital or?
Yes, that's all. That's actually all digital. Yes. So those first Earth-based cartoons I did, I was doing them super simple and quick, so I could do sort of one a day and very easy. I still sketch them by hand and draw them out by hand, but then I was sort of digitally inking, and then the other one is sort of hand drawn. So that's after those are sort of few years apart. In
Hmm.
that, yeah. So I was doing what I was saying, like doing the very simple. style, but then I was sort of doing the life drawings, and then I was sort of in Astro Kitty, I start to mash them together a bit. And so I'm sort of still doing the space. So Astro Kitty lives in Earth Space Universe, but she's sort of more drawn. I'm a bit more sort of slowing down a bit and doing a more sort of planned out drawing
Okay.
here with that and with her. I mean, they were sort of still the live drawings, but I was doing a little more process on them, doing a sketch and then inking from a more refined sketch, inking like by hand. I'd sort of got quite into doing analog techniques. So I was still sort of doing it analog a lot, but now, but I'll sort of switch between a bit. And the other thing with Astro Kitty is because I was using the music, I sort of came up. So I started working particularly with one friend, this guy Isaac, and we both sort of had the idea around the same time. Well, let's do a cartoon band because he was one I talked to quite early on about the album idea, and so so Astro Kitty's like the lead singer of the cartoon band, and then it sort of gelled a bit. Okay, so she's like the character in Astro Kitty, Space Jen's the character in Astro Kitty, and I called the band Earth Space Five. And I
Nice.
had an alien character who I just sort of drew on the cover of the album. But now, okay, now there's two others. Now there's Orkra, who's like an orc girl, and a hummingbird. And I'm working with someone I met through Art Battle called Kelty, and she's writing the comic. So she's sort of doing like a layout, sort of more than a thumbnail, but it's sort of a layout for me to work with. So I've just started doing a few pages with her, and so we're working on doing like what will be more like a comic book. And I've
Nice.
been a bit like, oh, I'm not sure if I'm inking it digitally or manually.
Yeah,
So
because it's I
yeah.
think I like the watercolor sort of feel that you got digitally. Like that's really what I've been. I mean, I'm just starting to teach myself digital media, but I really want to mimic more analog watercolor painting in my digital media, and it's so hard. So I'm like, oh my God, is that digital? Because that is so cool, and that's what I want to do, but I'm just not there yet. Like my taste is way surpassed my skill set right now.
All right. Well, I don't know. I've been working at it a while. I get you mean in like in the background of the Earth space cover.
Yeah, and then the little bubble for um the astronaut or Martian alien, the guy with the green hair, like that
Yeah.
little subtle variation from the lavender to I guess that's more of a mauve, like
So,
that kind of stuff.
so I've got one brush in particular that I use. I think it was just a sort of Photoshop generic brush. Um, somewhere in the brushes, but I found it. I sort of liked it. I might have found it via a book or something that I read about, and I was like, so it's one. It gives that sort of nice kind of brushy effect, and I'll use it sort of bigger or larger, but I use it a lot to get that particular kind of look, as opposed to like an airbrush. It's a little more sort of textured,
Yeah, that's
and that so that. That one I use a lot, and it works quite well because yeah, and I use it more like in sort of animation style. So the characters are more clean cut, and then I'll use it in the background, and I found that actually works quite well. So yeah.
I need to practice. I'm just so intimidated still. Right now, I'm inking and then scanning it in and then just doing a lot of autofill, just a little bit of different brushes, but I'm like, ugh, I'm just so slow with it right now.
Yeah, I know. I've definitely been there. I mean, I definitely sort of started about 2015, 16 of this, like, oh, I'm really going to focus on style and sort of get into it. And these are some of the things like now that I just had done right before that, really, where I sort of, that was like one of my later Pupil covers that I did for the Pupils. And then I was doing, these quite detailed search and find cartoons. And I made the book
Yeah.
Wizard Pickles. And that was like, one I did myself, the sort of fantasy puzzles. And it was all for quite detailed, cartoony work. And yeah, so I sort of after that I really want I sort of knew what I did, but I was like I really want to understand like what my style is a little bit. And these I guess were covers, so they're a little bit later than the content of the book, but even so it's that's sort of what I was doing. That's sort of where I built it up to at one point before I like sort of I'm going to break it all down again.
Simplify it again. So are
Yeah.
these are both digital?
So again, they're drawn both by hand, I think. So like I always sketch by hand, and then I'll ink. I've gone back and forth between manual and digital, but those I think they're manually inked and then digitally colored. And yeah, I was digitally coloring for a long time before I started more recently started doing watercolors again. Yeah.
Yeah, that's like one of my favorite things to look at is any art that has tons of like details and people, especially like the one for what is it? drain of chaos. Just
Oh
all,
yeah.
are those pigs or demons or a variation of monsters?
Yeah, yeah, well, Pupil, it's sort of the semi-autobiographical epic fantasy sitcom. So Pupil's a wizard. He's not that good at it. He's married to Tina the Warrior Princess. She's quite good at her job. He sort of stays at home doing magic. Uh, and in this story, the city gets invaded by an army of chaos, but there's already quite a lot of chaotics live in the city anyway. So yeah, it's just a sort of big sprawling story that I did. Yeah, so.
Oh my God, I love that so much. Just the subtle variation so you can pick out all the little chaotics. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, the chaotic. Yeah, I call them the chaotics. They're all the sort of the monsters, the goblins and the orcs and the trolls or whatever who live up, who live around about. They fully invaded the city there.
Nice.
Pupil, he's I guess, well, he's the avatar for myself somewhat. In that
No.
but yeah. So I try, but then there's all these. He's a sort of relatively sensible person, and even though he's not much good, but he's good morally and generally. But his friend, then he's got all these different friends, and the situation is very crazy. Yeah.
Funny, funny, funny. So let's jump into the questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can see your face. So where did you grow up? Obviously, you have a British accent. So where were you born and where did you grow up?
Yes. So I was born near Basingstoke, England, which is in the south of England, sort of south between London and the south coast there. Basingstoke appears in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. He says, "Can you
Oh,
take me as far as the Basingstoke roundabout?" And it's a town. It's famous for all its roundabouts, and it's got quite a lot of concrete towers and stuff. There's a song called "Towers of Basingstoke," and it was built up a lot after the war. After London was bombed a lot in the war, and then people were moved out. A lot of people to Essex, and then a lot of people moved into Basingstoke. So it was very built up after the war, and had this big sort of like the whole town centre is a big kind of concrete shopping mall. It's like a brutalist dream. I met a brutalist architect once who absolutely loved Basingstoke, but locally it doesn't get a lot of love. But I quite liked it there. I thought it was quite a good place to
I'm
live.
gonna, for
Yeah.
my American folks, I'm gonna have to put a map up because they don't know they don't know where you're talking about.
No, I think I looked up once. There is a Basingstoke in the USA somewhere. I forget where it was. Some town, like as most towns here are named after towns.
I'm Googling
Towns.
it right now so I can look on the map and see exactly where you're talking about. Okay, so that makes sense.
Yeah, Basingstoke there, and that's quite a nice part of the world. I'd say I was probably quite lucky to grow up there. I think, and
You you went to school there and all that, like
yeah, 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 I did. Well, I went to school nearby. I went to a school called Wellington College that was founded by the Duke of Wellington. There were quite a lot of army people there because their dads would be in the army and stuff. I didn't particularly love that school. I had some friends there that I liked. But yeah, I was sort of quite glad when that was over. I didn't enjoy school that much. Okay, we haven't talked about it, it might come up later, but my sort of disability, that was sort of, it didn't affect me too much when I was younger. It affected me a little bit. Definitely sort of made me more interested in being in the art room than being out on the sport field or
I was
whatever.
gonna ask, I don't know specifically what it is. Do you mind sharing that?
No, no, not at all. No, I have spina bifida or spina bifida occulta properly. Like, 'cause spina bifida is quite a big spectrum of actually, and it's actually quite a common birth defect. But you can have it very mildly, like almost that you might not even know it your whole life. It's a neural tube defect, so it's actually well, it's like how your spine forms. So you've got your spine, and then it sort of forms in the womb, like closing up like this, and it basically doesn't quite sort of close up properly around the bottom. And if you have it bad, you're born with your spinal cord is like all out. And
Wow.
you have real serious problems being in a wheelchair, and then nowadays they'll do like a surgery in the womb for that. It's like, it's quite yeah, it's quite a big thing. So I sort of like, I have it, but I have it very mildly, relatively. So you're sort of always aware that there's people that could be, you could be a lot more messed up.
Right. No, for sure.
So yeah, so I mean, it's been a thing, and when I was younger, it affected me less, and in a way, so when I'm older, it affects me more. And in a perverse way, it's better because people can sort of see that you've got a disability,
No, that's
because it's quite when
real.
you're younger, it's quite a hidden disability. Like occulta means like hidden. So, that would be something that I sort of had to struggle with quite a lot.
No, people are wild. I had an interviewer once tell me because I have pulmonary. hypertension, which means, sometimes my lungs will fill up with fluid and my heart doesn't pump out. And so I have all this stuff around that. And I said that to the reporter, and she looked at my photos and like, oh, you don't look like anything's wrong. Ma'am, how am I supposed to look? What do you
Yeah.
mean? So
Yeah.
like I feel you when you say, "Oh yeah," so people actually recognize that you have, something because if they don't think they're so ableist. It's so weird. You know,
Yes.
they
Yes.
don't
Yes.
make accommodations or even are inconsiderate around it. They just make a bunch of assumptions. So I didn't mean to interrupt, but that just struck me.
Yeah.
Like you literally, people have to visually see in order to sort of have a certain level of respect, which is wild.
Yeah, 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 yeah. It's difficult because people think you you look fine. So, everybody's got their problems of one
Yeah,
kind or another.
yeah.
So yeah, yeah. Then people are a bit more respectful. They see you sort of going around, or most people are.
But
Whatever.
not
I mean,
all.
I don't look for any sort of special consideration necessarily. But so it can be. It makes things difficult. That like maybe for other people they're quite easy.
Hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah.
So that, but that, okay, and I've never really written about it directly. I think at one point in my early 20s, I did try writing like a more personal comic about it, but I'd always sort of be more humor based, and I sort of did it, and I showed it to people, and they're like, "Oh my God!" And I was like, I sort of didn't really. That's not sort of really the reaction I wanted to
Right.
get out of it. I rather address it invisibly, I suppose, just through like my work being sort of humorous, and there's other things that are sort of like important. I mean, it's sort of like something like that. It's sort of in you, so it sort of affects
Nobody wants
everything you
nobody
do in
wants
one way
that,
or another.
like nobody wants that reaction of like someone feeling sorry for you or having pity. Nobody wants that reaction because I talk quite a bit about my health issues, but I always come from the lens or cloak it in a lot of humor. And a lot of times I find humor in the things that happen to me too.
Yeah,
Uh, so yeah, but to that reaction is it's actually weird to me when people have that reaction. Like you said, everybody has stuff going on. It's just like I don't know. It's almost not dismissive, but sort of like I don't know this weird hierarchy of people assign to our bodies. And even when you don't have a disability, that weird beauty standard hierarchy. So even if you aren't, don't have a disability, that's a weird thing that kind of persists in our society. I think it's changing now. But like, yeah, that on that one level, people are kind of like, oh, and you're just like, no, that is not, I don't need that in my life.
yeah,
Thanks.
you do it very well, Evie. Yeah, I enjoyed your sleep apnea comic and other things you do. I mean, yeah, you sort of managed to get the line right where you're sort of yeah you are telling something that's sort of truthful and helpful, and I understand it's helpful to people that are also experiencing things to have something that they can say, oh, somebody else is experiencing this too, but you also sort of put the humor in there, and that's good. And I also at the Oakland Creates, I picked up a copy of Demetra's comic that she wrote with her daughter about like COVID and long COVID. That was also quite that difficult. And again, that's talking about sort of a lot about you look fine. So
Mhm.
what's your problem? Yeah.
No, one of the other artists there, Tyler, their child has had long COVID, and that's the same thing. They're away at a university, and that's the same thing. You look fine, and it's like, you can't make those assumptions. It's the year of our Lord 2025. You can't just assume anymore.
No. Yeah. No, you can't. You can't. Yeah.
So did you,
But
you said you
some people are better at it than others. I think I prefer just to be more sort of in the sort of humor camp and just sort of general ideas. I mean, just like big like what ideas like just realizing that things are not necessarily. I mean, I like fantasy and science fiction because again, it's sort of taking you outside of just like what everybody takes for granted every day and
right,
becomes sort of boring to people. Like, but we live in this sort of magical, fantastical world, really.
for sure. So you said you didn't like school, so you finished. I think Europe has a little bit of a different system, right? It's called college, but I think that's high school, right?
Well, yeah, it sort of varies. Yeah, there's sort of sixth form college, which is a sort of separate thing. So sixth form is like your last 2 years of high school. So like in Harry Potter, he does his owls, and then he does his advanced wizarding levels or whatever. So you do your O levels and A levels. Or when I was there, I think they've changed O levels with GCSEs now. And like here, it's like what do you call it? AP classes are sort of like A level, but it's a bit more mixed up. But my school was probably a bit more like American school. It was like sort of 5 year like high school that was sort of both of them. So there are quite a few different sort of school systems there. I
Mm.
mean, some people would say that I went to a quite a posh, privileged school, but I don't know, it wasn't that. Nowadays, it's more privileged. Nowadays, it
Yeah.
seems more like they go to a nice country club, and I might see. I don't know. I don't know. There's a movie called If with Malcolm McDowell, which was sort of made in the 70s, and they're at a school that's quite similar. And that it ends up with them all on the roof shooting everybody down, so you probably can't see it anywhere now.
Oh no. I was gonna say I
Um,
like Malcolm McDowell. I like 70s movie, but the ending just threw me off.
that whole movie is quite dark and creepy. I mean, I remember seeing it when I was at that school. It was like, oh, I'm glad it's not as bad as that now, because it was sort of in the 70s, but it was sort of somewhat, I don't know. Yeah, I think, there's a lot of changes. I think all schools in England were quite sort of dark in the 60s and 70s, and,
Yeah, whenever I hear someone say they went to school in England, it's very maybe the equivalent of Catholic school here. Um,
equivalent of what?
Catholic schools
Oh,
here.
Catholic school. Yes, yes. There's Catholic schools. I knew kids that went to school with monks. Monks, yeah, monks sounded the worst. Yeah, people had monks for teachers.
Yeah,
That
it
was
kind of
horrible.
reminds me of that, where you had a uniform and very structured, very strict. Um, yeah, it was seems like public school that I went to was a free for all in comparison. So
Yeah, yeah. There's oh yes. Some people ask me that about uniforms because there's still quite a lot of uniforms in England. I think there's still a lot of them do. I mean, okay, the argument for uniforms is that they sort of put everybody more on the same level, like in that, so that there's a sort of socialization argument about it. We had a sort of somewhat uniform. It was sort of like a dress code sort of thing. So it wasn't full on uniform, but you couldn't just sort of go in your jeans or whatever.
nice. So you said you would rather be in the art room during school. So was there an
Yeah.
instructor or teacher that really inspired you to keep going with your art?
I mean, I sort of enjoyed it. My actual art teacher, he was a very good artist. He was quite accomplished artist, but he wasn't a very good teacher. Um,
Is that the
he'd sort of
case?
come over, he'd be painting you, "Ooh, ooh, ooh," and he'd go off, and you'd be like, "What?" And then when we had an exam at the end of like for our O levels, and he handed out like a sheet. It was a two-sided sheet of paper with all these sort of how to draw tips. And I was like, "Wait, there's actually things you can learn." About drawing. It was like all this stuff about shading forms. I was like, what, why am I hearing about this now?
Now, I had a teacher just like that. That's hilarious. She sucks so bad. And I won't say her name. She was so mean to me. I think I had initial talent so very early on, and I would ask her very complicated questions because all of my brothers are artists. And so I'd already came to school with a certain level of skill, and I would ask her pretty detailed and advanced questions, and she couldn't do it. And so she'd get mad and be retaliatory towards me. And I didn't
Oh,
figure that out until I got older that, oh, she can't do this.
yeah.
She was so mean. I was like, dude, why don't you just tell me to go get a book from the library if you can't do it, you know?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I knew he was a good artist, but he was just not a very good communicator, I guess, was more the problem. But I remember having assistant art masters and other people. And okay, and I got a lot from my dad. My dad was a cartoonist. Like, well, he worked as a barrister, like a lawyer in court. But he liked cartooning always, and he had cartoons that he got published in the newspapers and stuff like that. And when he was old, I mean, he's still alive, he's 95 now, and but he would, he still did a Christmas card this year, and he was old, he went back to cartooning and getting them published too. So he was always quite good at like, but they're more like a sort of straightforward, like a New Yorker cartoon kind of thing. And he
Right.
had a big Penguin book of cartoons that I looked, which was like the history of comics and stuff, the Penguin book of comics. I remember sort of discovering that and really reading that one very sort of closely. But yeah, I was always more like sort of comics, I suppose, as opposed to cartoons. Yeah.
No, it's amazing. School sometimes is the bigger hindrance to uh I don't want to say child, but a student continuing with the art. It's almost like, oh, that's not as important as chemistry and math, you know?
Yes, yes, yeah. I mean, yeah, it's always, I think it's a difficult thing with schools, isn't it? I mean, Victorian era, I remember hearing this, that, they needed you to do your reading, writing, and arithmetic because you were going to be the computer in the Victorian machine, and you had to sort of do all that. But, now we have computers that can do
Yeah.
all that stuff just like that. And, I'm